as a child. Welcome, Slimesters, to another Nightmares as a Child minisode. I'm your ghoulish co-host, Brett, and today we're going to do things a little bit differently because I have a special guest sharing some of their nightmares with me, along with myself, for one of these creepy Are You Afraid of the Dark tales for this spooky season this October. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce one of my best friends and good buddies from childhood, Maxwell from Relic Podcast, to tell us a little bit about one of the freakiest, most wildest monsters to ever grace Are You Afraid of the Dark, the Dead Man's Float pool corpse. Welcome to the show, Max.
Thank you, Brett. It's good to be here. I'm sorry I didn't come prepared with a ghoulish voice. And if you're going to be doing that the whole episode, should I get you a cough drop now? Or?
No, that's just for my intro. Just to set the tone. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm really happy to be here. I love nerding out about my childhood. And Are You Afraid of the Dark was a huge influence on anything creative to come after in my life in terms of writing and interests in horror movies and genre. So I'm really excited to talk about it.
I'm as well. I mean, it's quite a big influence in both of our lives, it seems, among many of our listeners. And I know this is a popular tale from what I've gathered around the 90s Nick community. So we might as well just dive right into it. What are your memories of the Dead Man's Float pool zombie?
So I think I was built for horror at an early age because the only two episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark that actually ever scared me are the one with the monster with the glowing eyes in the basement that would come out
the
whenever
dark music.
Yes, when the music would play. And I think that's because there's sort of a school of thought where it's what you don't see that's often scarier than what you do see because your brain fills in the gaps. But the second one was the Dead Man's Float, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So what I did is I didn't reference any photos of what it looked like before I rewatched it. So spoilers, I did rewatch it. What I did was I actually sat down and wrote out everything from memory from what I remembered of the episode. And I actually pretty much hit the mark. 85% of what I wrote down from memory was the plot. I got some of the characters wrong, like some of the minutiae, but I remembered the whole, starts in the 1950s, they seal at the pool, all of that. But most distinctly, I remembered what the monster looked like, and I wrote down a description before I rewatched it. And I was thinking to myself, I remembered it being very, that's what's so scary about the whole episode is that monster design. It really comes down to, the tension is there. I think it's really, for 26, 24 minutes, it's actually a really tight script for a children's show. It's actually, you can't really judge a children's show at the same standard as writing for adults, but insofar as that goes, it was actually really well written. But that monster design, I was just embedded in my memory. And so I was thinking before I rewatched it, it can't be that scary. I'm going to rewatch it and I'm going to see the seams or the zippers or little elements here or there. And the illusion's going to be ruined. And I'm actually really proud of whoever did that design, because when it came out of the water again, my first thought was oh no, it definitely stands the test of time. That is a fantastic monster design. And it's simple. I remember on the most recent watch this afternoon, probably 20, 25 years after I originally watched this episode, I remember thinking what works about it is how simple it is. And I remember thinking at the time, watching it, how kind of weird it was that it was this sort of this reddish color. And then when you rewatching it, they mention how the chemical turns things red. And so it made so much sense. And that kind of bloody look, it almost is bloody. And quite honest, that should not have been shown on children's television. That not only just because it is really freaky, and that's probably why it lingers in my head, but also because I almost think it's wasted. It's something designed like that. And it's a very simple design. When you're looking at it, it's the Dead Man's Float monster. Is that what it's called? The Dead Man's Float corpse monster? Does it have a name?
It doesn't have an official name. I saw in the credits it was called Zombie, but I like to call it the pool corpse because it fits the bill and it sounds creepier.
Yeah, and I don't even remember what the what the original explanation for it was. I know that, rewatching you said it's like a spirit that was lingering from when they kind of pulled a poltergeist and they moved the graves and they forgot to move one body, and that's probably the spirit, which kind of leaves a lot of lingering questions about how the metaphysics work of a spirit that can be defeated with methyl orange and magnite. Magnite? I don't know. I read it down.
Kaboom surprise, as Zeke put it.
Yeah. The science checks out, I'm sure. But it really does stand the test of time. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Vecna from Stranger Things, if you've seen that. And if
don't spoil it. Yeah.
I won't. There is a monster in Stranger Things that looks very similar to this.
I know what he looks like. I just don't know his background, and I don't want it spoiled because I've seen
I actually don't either. I feel like we're such bad nerds. We're admitting we haven't seen the most recent.
I'm just waiting for the hype to die down so I can enjoy it personally.
I'll probably rewatch it around Halloween. I'm going through some spooky shows right now.
Cool.
Anyways, what I caught this time around was when Zeke is the name of the kid, right? The male lead. He says that he almost drowned because of plant matter and weeds holding him down. When you look at this corpse monster, I didn't put two and two together about why it looks so like almost like silly string or like tendons or something. Mm-hmm. But I think the whole idea is it's supposed to look like plant matter or weeds or gnarls because it's basically a manifestation of his fear. Mm-hmm. And that is, I don't know if that was intentional, but if it is, that is such a brilliant detail that makes me think that whoever was asked to do this monster design really paid attention to that script and really did their best with so little. Because it is pretty low budget. Although I do have to say, the scene where he slashes the monster initially, trying to attack it, and it shows that the monster is made out of water, and it like goes through. For the 90s, I thought it was a really well done, very simple CGI. And so I'd love to know, because I don't have this information, maybe you do. I'd love to know the effects budget, what practical effects were done. Because really the monster's only around for, I would say, visually around, for maybe 5 minutes at the end of the episode.
About a quarter of the episode time.
Yeah, and they just sort of do the jaws kind of underwater, which is also really well done. It really kind of, and I think that's what I said earlier about it's about what you don't see. That's often scarier because you're wondering what it looks like. But this almost surpasses that expectation because it's actually scarier. It's actually scarier than what you think it is. When that thing came out, I was like, oh, that's too much. The fact that that's burned in my memory, and this is probably one of the few Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes that I, 2 decades, maybe more, I don't know how old I am anymore, after watching it, I could write almost all of that plot from memory and describe the monster without seeing it again. I mean, that's a testament to just all of the design work and story work that it went into this.
But yeah, I mean, to answer your question off the bat, Anik Chartier was the lead makeup artist on that show, and she was actually part of episode 7, which is the Are You Afraid of the Dark 30th anniversary reunion that we did exclusively on Splat Attack. And while
my gosh.
Yeah, and while she
so you've met her?
Yeah, a couple times. I've talked to her for a while. I made the Scary Tales Are You Afraid of the Dark book too.
No, I'm sorry. So you went to the source. So she designed that. What was it? A Halloween costume? What? I need to know everything.
Unfortunately, that didn't come up during the conversation. We talked more about the Quicksilver Demon's makeup more than anything, which was also pretty freaky. And we have a Nightmares as a Child episode coming up for that. Hint, hint. But I can't really speak too much on that. I just know that I remember seeing her apply all that red makeup to her and using bits of fish netting and hair and a prosthetic chest. And the guy was walking around on the studio back a lot of Nickelodeon studios in these ragged pants, and pretty much just they said to him, get in the water and do the shots really quick so he didn't have to hold his breath too long.
It's such a simple and effective design, and the tying the red look, which I finally picked up on after 20 years.
As you can tell, I'm actually doing the color scheme right here with the
the
bluish pool water and the red body to mimic that. That was intentional.
Is she still in the industry?
Oh yeah, she's
oh good.
Quite busy with many feature films. I remember she did a lot of X-Men films recently. You could always check her on IMDb, but yeah, she's still doing stuff.
Good for her.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess the one thing I wanted to mention on this was that I don't know if you caught this line, but when Zeke takes Clarice, which sounds like chlorine, which I'm wondering if that was intentional. That's so funny. When they take her into the boys' changing room, she says, "If this is your big surprise, I've seen it before." And I was like, "Really? What does that mean, Clarice?" Yeah. So that was something that I picked up on as an adult.
Yeah, that's very similar to the writing at the end of The Bookish Babysitter, where Belinda's like, "I've already been paid, Mrs. Winters," and I'm like, "Are you a prostitute?" That's where my mind jumps immediately.
Get that money. Okay.
Yeah, I really think it's an effective monster. Like you, Dark Music and Dead Man's Float are like the two scariest episodes that stood the test of time for me and still hold up incredibly well because it leaves your mind to wonder, to fill in all the gaps. Dream Girl being my third favorite, but that's more of a sentimental one than a scary one.
Anything with the ghosts, I just thought was good writing. A lot of those ghost stories really still, the dollhouse one, the Quicksilver monster was, I do remember that one with the shadow coming out of the wall. Yep. There's just, there is a lot of really high quality writing for children's shows. Because first of all, to make something scary is hard. It's hard to write something scary because it's so
especially these days because everyone's desensitized.
Yeah, and we're seeing, I think we are, especially this year, seeing a return to form with a lot of horror, a lot of cool ideas, especially like in the indie scene of horror. But it's hard to do horror, and it's hard to do horror for kids because you have to do something that's not gory or, it varies from society to society. Yeah. And like even this, I don't think today you can show on television. I think there would be too many complaints. So we really kind of grew up in a golden age.
I'm not going to talk too much about my recounting of the tale. I mean, everyone who's in the Are You Afraid of the Dark community loves and knows Dead Man's Float pretty well. It was told by Stig. It was season 5, episode 1, and oddly enough, this tale didn't get him into the Midnight Society. He had to come back 2 episodes later to tell the tale of Station 109.1, which I thought was a low blow. But when I interviewed Gigi McHale about that question, he mentioned, it wasn't tied exactly to the tale because the Midnight Society segments are filmed differently. They just wanted to put a twist on the character to get him in. So it had no correlation with the quality of the story, which I was really find out because, man, if you bring your A game from day one and you can't get in, what's wrong with these kids?
Well, I forget her name, but it's the kind of posh, like, prissy girl that I think was the dissenting vote. When they voted at the end.
Sam and Kiki were not fans of Stig because he was stinky and a little bit obnoxious, but not intentionally. So what are some of our childhood memories that are related to the Dead Man's Float pool zombie that you can recall that really, I mean, they don't necessarily have to traumatize you. They could just be vivid memories, but when it comes to nightmares as a child, I like to think of spooky stories that we came up with that really affected us as a kid.
Pools. Definitely pools after watching that. I think what got me is something about when they got out of the pool, like the whole, like when your foot is just dangling and can still grab you. Something about that. It's leaving the pool that always got to me. And I would always think about that episode whenever I saw like like an official school pool, not like one you go to on vacation or one that's
like the YMCA.
Yeah, like the YMCA. And even I did a little bit of swimming with the swim team here in Sydney because I wanted to work on my cardio. I got into athletics like 2 years ago after COVID was sort of like the lockdowns were lifted. So I wanted to, boost my cardio by swimming, which is, by the way, very hard. Swimming is a very hard sport, and I do wrestling.
Oh, I know. I applied to be a lifeguard 3 years ago. I had to do a lot of
that's awesome.
diving.
So I'm sure you've got stories. But so the pool here in the city is the Ian Thorpe pool, and it is like state of the art. Like it looks like futuristic, like the Final Fantasy VIII Balam's pool.
Oh, awesome.
Like pool. And even then, I remember just whenever I see a drain, like that drain in the locker room, that's when I think about something bubbling up. And the idea that thing can follow you anywhere because it's liquid, that is so scary. And I do think about that often. I still think about that monster quite often.
I know it was pretty much a one and done story, but I would have loved to see like either a prequel or a sequel to it, just to see it in action against new kids or a different setting to see how it would handle the situation.
I think you could do a whole movie, to be honest, of that based off of that episode. And it's interesting. I think a lot of that episodes like that, a lot of those really monstrous with a hook kind of episodes, like oh, it can follow you anywhere, or there's rules. I think that set me up for Doctor Who later in life, because a lot of kids in Britain and Australia who grew up watching Doctor Who, which we didn't in the US, it really wasn't available to us, so we didn't really have that experience. They, I tell them about Are You Afraid of the Dark? They're like, oh, that's kind of like, that was Doctor Who for us, or local stuff. I know that there's tons of Australian children's shows that are very similar to Are You Afraid of the Dark that a lot of people talk about. But yeah, the idea of a monster that has those really specific rules, like you can't blink, or you can't go into the shadows, or you have to look at it, and if you look away, it's all very much, it's very similar to that.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, my memories of Dead Man's Float Zombie, while I thought, I had an interesting reaction when I first saw it, because I remember just standing like in my living room watching it on like our 35-inch TV, which is really big at the time, and seeing him emerge out of the pool, and I'm like, whoa, cool.
It's really startling. I remember being like, oh, that's a lot. Like I remember specifically being like, this is the next level. Well, because it's a corpse, and it's like you don't really confront like and because it's red, it's almost gory, even though it's not. And I think that was so smart because it's very ambiguous.
Yes. Yeah, and that really lends itself to it. And also the contrast between the pool water too. It's pretty much color complementary in that regard. So it stands out even more
really
than say like a white skeleton.
The lighting and the cinematography, again, I think were really good, especially use of water, because water is going to affect lighting a lot. And again, for a kid show, I'm glad that I think every project should be treated as if it's the most important thing in the world. And I get the sense that people really cared about this.
Oh, yes.
This production.
Yeah, DJ McHale was at the helm for this particular episode, and he came back swinging after a lull in season 4. With this one.
Well, it's the first episode of the season.
Yeah, you gotta go big, make an impression.
Yeah.
So getting back to my childhood memories of this, I remember just being like scared but also excited at the same time, because I was more into skeleton type monsters, and some of the more gruesome looking episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark at that time. I was around 2nd grade, and there was a time where I would go over friends' houses, like my friend Josh's, because he had a in-ground pool, and even though we'd like race to the deep end, just out of nowhere that creepy music would pop into my mind, and I'm like, wait a minute, what if he's actually down here because he's invisible? And that lingering thought while I'm down there counting down the seconds of how long I could hold my breath, I'm like, no, I'm going back to the shallow end, and I just frantically scurried back to the steps just in case it wouldn't pull me down, because my friend was on the other side of the pool at the time. So that's what really stuck out to me. And then there's a couple other moments where we got our above ground pool built, which is like this 30 feet diameter circle that was attached to our deck in the backyard.
I've been in it.
Yep, you can confirm that, so it's real. Where I would practice holding my breath because of that instance, just so that I can have more room to maneuver in case I had to fight him or punch him underwater. And
that's so funny.
I was at a point where I was doing this frequent enough that I could hold my breath for about a straight minute without having issues. Now I could only hold it for like 10 seconds because I haven't had much practice. But back then I would just literally like push myself down to the surface, look up at the sky, and just calm my mind and just kind of take in the moment of being in the center of my pool underwater. And there's a few instances where I was doing it closer to nighttime, and I thought I saw like the silhouette of him just like lingering like this on the edge of the pool, waiting to like float towards me when I wasn't paying attention. And of course that would freak me out, and I'd jump out, catch my breath, and then get my mind back into reality to reassure myself that nope, that was just a TV show. This didn't bother me. I love that episode. It didn't scare me. But I find that when I come back to these today, the scariest episodes leave the best impression on me, and somehow it transforms from a state of fear to love because of how deep of an impact it first left an impression. So luckily I don't have that issue of pools now. I think it just kind of healed over time, but those two instances in particular, when I was a kid in the 90s, it really affected me where it did have that Jaws effect. It was like the lingering threat, and if it got too close to you, it was boom, game over. But as long as you had some distance between you and the pool corpse, then you were okay. It's just that feeling like, oh shoot, it's coming after me. I have to get out or else I'm done for.
I think what you just said there about why this monster really works and why it's so effective is because it's not just a specific childhood fear of drowning. It's a universal fear. And when you look all over the world and across cultures, especially cultures where water is really vital, whether in religious or spiritual practice or just, I mean, water, of course, is vital to all of us. It's how we live. But here in Australia, there's a creature from Aboriginal belief systems called the bunyip. And it is a monster that will drown you if you go close to the watering holes. And water is really, there's a lot of sacred beliefs around water here. But the bunyip is like the most prevalent monster that does that. And it was, parents would tell their children not to go near the water holes because it will drown you. And what's interesting about that is that, there's the idea that it's a spiritual belief. It's like kind of like a boogeyman, or it's a tale to tell your children to prevent them from drowning when the parents are doing other things. But the other thing that's kind of, always sticks in the back of my mind is that, especially in Aboriginal culture, oral traditions which are passed down, like we're talking 80,000 years, like really a long time. They're so precise, and the tradition of passing on stories is so just ingrained and accurate that when people studied megafauna and fossilized records, they were able to put together animals that had not been seen in thousands of years and link them to these stories, these oral traditions. So it does make one wonder if perhaps a bunyip or some sort of drowning monster did at one point exist. And if that existed, well, this is such an ingrained fear of something causing us to drown and pulling us under. Where does this, is this just a shared collective unconscious, or is there something out there?
Yeah, it really opens up the imagination to a plethora of questions in that regard, because if the spirit survived, can it change form or move on to other areas? Or, I always wondered about the story behind the story based off of what,
because they don't really know what it was. The janitor just speculates that that's what it is. And that's also what's so creepy, is that there's something a little unexplained. They're like, what is this thing? What are the rules? And did they really destroy it?
Yeah, I do have to mention, since I had that childhood memory where I thought it was in my above ground pool a few times, that when we put the pool cover on, it wouldn't always go on perfectly, and it was like a very dark colored tarp.
It would rise up.
Yeah, I always imagined his body would rise up in the center of it, just waiting for me to come back. Yeah, I think that's what Are You Afraid of the Dark does best. It gives you like breadcrumbs to kind of go off of in terms of what to expect, but it doesn't give you the whole slice of bread or the whole loaf. You have to figure that out on your own. And because we all have a different interpretation, it really feeds into our deeper, more primal fears that we have associated with it. And of course, there's plenty of people out there in the world who are afraid of drowning or even just death. So it really leverages all the well-established parts of the human condition to the fullest here. And that's what makes it
absolutely
hold up so well 3 decades later, and it'll continue to hold up well as time goes by.
It's great storytelling.
Yeah. Well, I think we're gonna wrap this Nightmares as a Child episode up, but thank you so much, Max, for joining me today and talking about the pool zombie from Dead Man's Flow. I had a lot of fun, and we would love to have you back on the podcast sometime, either for Are You Afraid of the Dark or something else you'd love to talk about.
This is a lot of fun, and I could go on and on about all of these things. Thank you for having me on. If your audience wants to find me, I'm at Lost Treasure Pod on Twitter. I do Relic the Lost Treasure podcast, which is about lost artifacts, kind of Indiana Jones, goes through like the stories of like how they're lost, where they might be. I also do RPG Treasure Chest, really into treasure, seeing a theme here. which is about JRPGs as well. And I'm a creative writer, and maybe one day you'll see me on professional wrestling. Who knows at this point? Because I'm doing that too. So yeah, I would love to be back on.
Awesome. Yeah, I know. I got so many ideas in my head that I'd love to share with you because we have that deep connection, and I feel like we could go in any direction we want, not just Are You Afraid of the Dark. So there's a lot of potential there. And for all you Slimesters at home who are avid fans of Splat Attack, Max actually chimed in with us way back in episode 12 of season 1, where we did our favorite 90s holiday specials, and he talked about the Rugrats Hanukkah special. So if you're interested in hearing his take on that, definitely go check out that episode after you listen to this one.
Sweet.
All right, Slimesters, we're going to put out the campfire and head on home for today. But tune in next time for another Nightmares as a Child, where we tell more spine-tingling tales to give you nightmares. Splat you later.
If you mix manganite with water, the reaction is always the same. Kaboom. We'll have a surprise.